1. That was the current population of beings inhabiting the entire extended multiverse. One single sapient being lay sleeping on the last patch of solid matter, topped with the last gas left from what once was. To the left of the being sat 2 items. One, a small rusted water bottle filled to the brim with water. The other, a small cardboard pizza box belonging to a human shop that had long since been forgotten and destroyed. The entire scene existed within a sphere only 10 meters in diameter, with another human construct, a strange machine designed specifically to ensure the continued existence of this place. Located at the exact center, lighting it all in an azure glow. This was all that remained. Existence began and ended here. It awoke and rose. It felt as though there was no lapse in awareness, no significant feeling designating that it had awoken from a slumber. Nothing. It went directly from unaware to aware and wasted no time in obtaining the bottle of water in an appendage and pouring its contents into a certain orifice designed to receive such. After a time, it was satisfied, turning its attention to the ham, mushroom, and pineapple pizza located within the last pizza box in existence, and began consuming it slowly, savoring the taste as it looked at the boundaries of its home. It followed the lines and cracks of the bleak lunar stone, out to where they began to blur and fade, and then beyond. To say there was nothing but pure black darkness there was to imply that there was darkness there at all, which there most certainly was not. It looked out at, through, into. It wasn't sure what description could be used, if something such as this could be described, to the void of non-existence that permeated and ruled supreme beyond its home, silently waiting beyond invisible boundaries to complete its invasion. It lazily, vainly searched for another speck, a sign of anything within the formless form of its timeless enemy, but it knew it would find a knot. Even if by some immense chance, an astoundingly convenient stroke of luck ensuring that another such device preserving its home somehow became synchronized with the timeline and remnant spatial rules with that of its own, it would never be able to detect it. Even mere centimeters away, there were no rules of physics or logic in the space between them, and thus nothing through which light, sound, or even thought could travel through to reach each other. It paused on its current slice of pizza, idling before it had taken its first bite. It moved its food away from its orifice, out towards the edge of the island of existence, stopping with the tip of the slice flopping lazily just before the edge. The entity knew what would follow, but it enjoyed doing it nonetheless. There was little else to do here anyway. With a slow motion, the slice was forced halfway beyond the boundaries of existence, before being withdrawn to reveal that all exposed to the void was gone, having been erased well below the subatomic level, below the quarks, beyond even the level of simple, raw energy. It was gone forever, erased from reality forever, impossible to recover by any means. With no interest in continuing the half-wasted slice, the entity carelessly tossed away the remaining piece, watching it briefly before it vanished. The sight reminded it of a story formed by a human many eons ago. The entity was not new to the universe, oblivious to the degree at which reality had been perverted. No, it was old and timeless, hiding beyond the view of watchful eyes, reaching out and listening quietly with its mind, learning of all that happened within its reach. Even as the holes began to tear open wider and wider, birthing untold new horrors and mysteries that could never feasibly be explained, it listened and learned how these things had come to be, and planned for the inevitable time to come. It waited until the time was right, and took the 3 items it needed. Items which once would have been protected and revered, had lost importance and lay discarded by their owners, lapsing from their minds. The first was the pizza box. A simple little thing capable of generating endless supplies of food whenever closed and opened once more. The limitation of such food always being a form of pizza was acceptable, especially considering how the generated food had eventually come to be randomized when the entity grew bored of the same repetitive flavors. The second appeared as simple as the first, a mere canister forged by the humans that had slowly yielded to time and age, but still retained its ceaseless supply of water that required only emotion to utilize. The water was good, too, the mindless bottle ensuring that only liquid fit to nourish and sustain a jeweled regal flowed from its neck. With endless nourishment ensured for the entity's own health, only one item remained, something with which to protect the final vestige of reality, an anchor to hold the ship of logic and sanity steadfast in the storm of chaos and destruction. The machine was used frequently by the humans to try and save themselves, but overuse and recklessness weakened them until they could do naught but bow beneath the foot of the invading destruction. This one, however, stood strong and alone, though it never ceased function, endlessly grinding away to hold the spokes of physics together around it. Its own solitude strengthened it tenfold as it used the force of non-existence to hold the small sphere together in spite of it. With these 3 items, the entity knew it could survive indefinitely, and as such waited until the inevitable time came when their use was necessary. The entity recalled the story it brought to mind, one of a single, lone human fighting against a seemingly unstoppable force to save the universe from it. A perfect acid known only as nothing, capable of consuming and erasing all it touched regardless of what it was, but capable of being used for endless possibilities to be achieved. It recalled how the tale had ended, with the humans seemingly failing in their endeavor, becoming the final remaining component of its existence, but being granted the power to undo almost all the damage that had occurred. The entity gave its closest analog to a smirk, realizing how similar the story was to his own predicament. But such were mere stories. Such a rebirth was impossible here. Who was left to serve as the new architect? Nobody had made it but him. The Dreamwalkers? They didn't make it, mischievous and cunning as they were. The bastard tricksters had likely realized their realm was crumbling around them and pulled some sly trick to try and preserve themselves, perhaps by sleeping themselves. But there's only so much of itself an Ouroboros can eat before there is no more to feed on. And so the Dreamwalkers would have died, taking the dreamlands with them. Dreams were no longer empty for the entity. There were simply no dreams. The priests of Steel and Bone? They didn't make it. They were too blinded by their furious rage for each other, trying to resurrect their own deity while destroying the other to think of their solutions to the problem. Even if the two had miraculously cooperated, worked together to birth and forge a combined deity of unrivaled might, it would have been unable to prevent the reverberating destruction that approached it. The entity wouldn't have been surprised if the two religions finally died with their leaders in each other's arms, clutching at the daggers each had pierced the other with. The factory? It didn't make it. It likely never considered destruction as a threat, just a way to turn a greater profit before it was finally killed. It certainly made sure its walls didn't fall unnoticed, producing more and more flaws and errors in logic and casualty as the end approached its borders, screaming louder and louder as the distance shortened until its maw was finally silenced like it should have been long ago. Perhaps the factory was a small part of non-existence, working to further its own spread? It didn't matter now. None of the factory's machinations or products stood anymore. The toy maker? He didn't make it, but he helped lessen the pain. While he was viewed as warped and insane by others, his motives were pure-hearted and true, wishing only joy and happiness to those who needed it. Even as their parents became unspeakable monsters right before their eyes, the toy maker ensured they had some pleasant item to think back to before their end came. Not just children, no. Any who saw the wave approaching and were despairing were serviced by the toy maker, getting gifts of impossible puzzles and helpful dolls and the like. And though even the toy maker met his end eventually, he passed peacefully, remembering the smiles he granted to those who suffered. The sisters? They didn't make it. No number of fathers, timelines, events, or plans had saved them in the end. No magnitude of revenge was enough to scare the destroyer from them. No desperate pleas brought divine protection to them. No, they passed without a thought or heed, their own secrecy preventing their story from being brought to mind, even by their father. The librarians? They didn't make it. Endless access to unlimited knowledge, countless burrows and trapdoors to sneak through, infinite supplies to anything they wished, and yet, still, they too fell. Their books shattered like glass, their legacy melted like their bones, and within moments they were gone, as though their own book had been burnt. They knew what was coming and how it was coming, and so they knew more than any other how futile it was to resist a primordial force without mind or emotions. Their stories remained, though, remembered by the few who encountered them and remained, and were told as legends and myths to entertain the babes and wives. But even they fell in time, knowledge itself becoming corroded and worn with time. The Godslayers? They definitely didn't make it. In a way, they were the lucky ones being spared from viewing what their thoughtless actions had wrought. The entity didn't entirely know what became of them. Were they slain early and mercilessly? Or did some of them remain long enough to view the feedback of their mindless destructive nature consume them whole? Did they see as their rivals became powerful and corrupted in their obsessive motives and involuntary actions? Could they scream as the world shattered and melted like ice around them? Did they hear their legacy crumble and burn beneath the weight of their sins? The entity did not know. It had been too fearful of its own demise to connect with them and learn. The Foundation? They didn't make it. They thought they were the stonework, the base of what would be normal and not paranormal. They thought they were the ones who could be depended upon to preserve their world from the horrors beyond. They thought they knew enough to turn the inexplicable into tools to use them to save the world. They thought they knew how to abuse certain flaws in logic to further their goals to protect everyone. They thought they would be the steadfast ones, the reliable ones, the justified ones, the ones that could and the ones that would. But they weren't. They had lied to themselves until they thought it was true, but inevitably it was still false. Still a lie. They never realized what was happening when the foundation beneath them buckled and crumbled. They never realized how warped and distorted they had become from the madness of the world. They never realized how badly their machines and tools were treated, rendering them useless. They never realized how badly they had failed not just themselves nor their world, but all life. Even the legendary Foundation had fallen, the supposedly prophesized saviors. Even they didn't make it. Nobody didn't make it. But the entity did. Alone. Only the entity remained to rebuild the universe, but it knew it couldn't. It didn't know how to, or what to do. It didn't have the cunning of the Dreamwalkers. It didn't have the passion of the priests. It didn't have the audacity of the factory. It didn't have the hope of the Toymaker. It didn't have the determination of the sisters. It didn't have the knowledge of the librarians. It didn't have the focus of the Godslayers. It didn't have the resolve of the Foundation. It had nothing but itself, a bottle of water, a box of pizza, a section of stone, and the machine preserving it all. There were no tools. There were no guides. There was no hope. Time had long since run out. There were no days, no hours, no minutes, no seconds. There was no undoing or redoing. There was nothing but now and there. The entity turned to see the familiar machine and moved its form for the first time in a long, long time. It remembered the button. It relocated itself to have the large, bright red button conveniently accessible to its appendages. It remembered what the button does. It gently rested an appendage against the button. There was nothing left to do. The entity consumed the final slice of pizza it had and cast the box out into the hungry abyss. There was nothing left to see. The entity consumed more of the water, then cast the bottle into the abyss with the box. There was nothing left. Thoughts of ageless lifetime raced through its mind. It remembered everything within an instant, searching vainly for anything it could possibly do other than the inevitable. There was nothing. The entity pushed the button, ordering the machine to stop. With one final silent motion, the jaws of the rat snapped shut. 0.